Welcome back, everyone. This is Discussing Who. I am Kyle Jones, and I want to start by welcoming back Lee Shackelford. Lee, how are you?
I'm pretty good, man. Pretty good for somebody hunkered down in a pandemic. How about you?
I can't complain. I think I'm hunkered down in the pandemic, too. Kind of going a little stir crazy,
Sure.
but, that's to be expected. But that's why we have podcasts. That's why we have Doctor Who podcast, and that's why I'm able to say also, welcome back, Clarence Brown.
Hey, man. Glad to be on again, as always, and hunkered down as well. So I'm doing fine and, ready to talk this out.
Also hunkered down with us, if you are listening, chances are, if you're listening in 2020, in March, April, May, probably not March, because this is already in May, so you can't go back in time, because unless we're literally...
Who can't?
Time Lords, maybe, but maybe we're not. But anyway, if you are listening to us, it's 2020, chances are we're in some stage of a global pandemic. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. When you're listening to us, whenever that is, thank you. We appreciate you spending your time, however long this episode is. We appreciate it. Thank you for being here. And as a way of showing our thanks, we're just going to continue doing what we do because that's why you're here. So, Gentlemen, are you ready for some news? Because I actually have some pretty cool news.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, let's do it.
This comes from Big Finish, and it kind of turns or kind of connects to the pandemic that I was just talking about. There is a Big Finish, and it's the first full-length Doctor Who audio drama to have been recorded entirely during lockdown. So basically, after this whole coronavirus, social distancing, lockdown, stay at home occurred, and it's going to star Tom Baker, Louise Jameson, and John Leeson as the Fourth Doctor, Leela, and K9. And the story is called Doctor Who: Shadow of the Sun. Interesting.
Oh, what fun. Fun.
I just think it's cool the fact that, even like what we were saying we're doing, this is a release for us for being creative, connecting ourselves with the outside world and with each other. Mm-hmm. They're doing that too. And I think that is so cool.
Yeah. I just, every time a classic Who cast gets together to do something like this, I'm reminded of the power of this marvelous power of the imagination and of audio drama, that as we listen to the three of them, if we choose to, what we can have in our mind's eye is the Fourth Doctor and Leela and K9 as they were 40 years ago, right?
Yep.
And that's who we'll see as we hear them. It's wonderful. And, and it's, because it's radio, K9 can fly or whatever we want to have happen here.
Indeed. And you know what? Since we are talking about pandemics and we're talking about audio, I think we would be remiss if we do not mention something that all three of us have participated in. And Lee, I'll let you mention that there is a podcast about washing hands that we've been talking about. And we were actually literally talking about it before we went to recording. So would you like to
just a few minutes ago?
Yep. So would you like to tell everybody what that is?
We've talked about it before, but I just want to point people to the website, and it is, get this address, Listen, Rinse, Repeat podcast.com. It's called Listen, Rinse, Repeat. And the whole idea is to do things that are little, tiny little stories that are the recommended length for washing your hands. If it's possible, you've come into contact with something that's come into contact with something that's come into contact with that may have the coronavirus. So wash your hands, folks, and be distracted while you're doing it by listening to Listen, Rinse, Repeat.
Awesome.
How's that?
You could not have done that even any better than Lee Shackelford.
You'd think I'd practiced it, which I have not. But here you go.
Cool. Well, I think you will both enjoy this because I know you're both readers, and I think the next piece of news you will find enjoyable because I'm actually going to take a look at this. This is from Gizmodo, and it says that all Doctor Who Series 12 scripts are available online. And there's a link that gives us to go to that, and I will put that in our show notes.
Wow.
Yeah, that is really cool. How often do they do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. How often do they do that? Lee, or both of you? And is this something that we see from other television shows, or is this kind of exclusive to something Doctor Who's doing?
I'm wondering if it's entirely legal because they usually guard those with they're pretty proprietary about it. They published a book that I bought largely because I wanted to see Midnight on paper as it was written. And so it was the scripts from the Donna Noble years. Yeah, but that was a licensed BBC item. But a lot of what you find out on the web are transcripts where people or software have literally just written down what's said on the screen. That's not a screenplay.
Right.
So I wonder.
Now, these are on the BBC site, though.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's legit then, man. They wouldn't. Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yep.
I missed that part. Yeah. That's a very important distinction. Yes.
I just clicked in. So
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. And there's also some video links to go to that too, up above the actual scripts. So that would be cool to read just to see how they break down things like the finale, all of that good stuff. Very cool.
Time for our reenactments. Here we go.
Yeah. Right.
Guy who can play the Doctor.
Who do I get to play again?
The Doctor. Unfortunately, this one doesn't have a recorder, so bummer.
Darn. Okay.
I can't find it. Yeah.
All righty. So, gentlemen, are you ready to actually get into the review?
Oh yeah.
I guess.
Might as well. So that means I get to say, and if this is the first time you've ever listened to an episode of Discussing Who, just know that this is one of my very all-time most favorite parts of doing this podcast, which is when I get to say, if you have not seen this episode, which is Spearhead from Space, if you've not seen Spearhead from Space, put us on pause, go out, watch the episode, come back, because from this moment forward, spoilers.
Spoilers. Affirmative. Spoilers. Spoilers. Affirmative. Spoilers.
Alrighty, the spoiler warning has gone out and we are back to review Spearhead from Space. This is the first story of the 7th season of Doctor Who, airing in 4 parts between the 3rd and the 24th of January, 1970. The story marks the transition from black and white to colorized format and introduces John Pertwee as the 3rd Doctor. So, Clarence, I want to go with you first. Summary view. What did you think of this story?
I did not like it at all. It just didn't pique my interest. Didn't keep me engaged. I do like the exploration of an alien coming to Earth. I thought that was interesting. But beyond that, I have to say I was pretty bored with it. What about you guys?
All right, Lee Shackelford.
It is not an action-packed 4 episodes. It's many people complain that it only gets interesting once the Autons start killing people, which is in the last episode. So yeah, it's hard. It suffers from the thing that often happens with that has happened in later years, that a regeneration story has got a lot of stuff to unpack. And this one isn't just introducing the 3rd Doctor, but it's introducing Liz Shaw and the Autons and really getting us the best look at UNIT that we've had so far. And, it's just a lot to do. There's a lot of stuff to cover. And a lot of the stories of this period are kind of corporate espionage stories. And I always wonder how many little kids were fascinated by that. Because I find it a drag, even though I feel like I'm old enough to know what's going on. Guys at desks yelling over their desks at people is one of the things about Classic Who that always gets on my nerves. So it's too bad. It's too bad. It certainly does have its moments, but some of it is about production too, and I want to get into that later too, just for people who don't know, because it looks like crap, and there's a good reason why. So, but we'll save that for later.
I'm going to agree with you guys. I didn't realize how much there was to be bored with. until Clarence made the comment this afternoon about watching the last episode of the War Games. And then before we started recording, I went back and watched the last story of the War Games. I was just immediately astonished at how captivated I was with that episode, and where I was watching but wasn't engaged in Spearhead from Space for most of the story that didn't revolve around the moments, air quotes, the moments that, you're looking at from a fan. I was kind of bored with about half of it, to be brutally honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned, the episode 10 of War Games. It is so good. It is so good, man.
Right.
It manages to hit all the points that I find repeated in New Who, with the leaving of companions, how that impacts you, and then just what happens to the Doctor by the end of this. Is one of those generations that feels hard to cope with. And then we get this.
Right between the eyes.
And I'm not trying to draw this as a parallel, but there's no other way to do it than to draw this parallel. This is a situation where you have the cast and, the main cast, the Doctor, they all leave, and you're replacing with a new Doctor, a new logo, a new companion. I am obviously, referring to Series 11, but also I could be referring to Series 5, because the same thing happened with Matt Smith's first series. All that said, I think that is a jar to the viewer, whereas maybe when you have a companion as a holdover between Doctor this and next Doctor coming, it creates a little bit of continuity so that it flows a little bit better.
Now, was it new showrunners as well, or was it the same? Do we know?
Yeah, there's a producer who was changing hands, and he was going to stay on until they got the color series underway. But so he's the one who cast John Pertwee, sort of was overseeing all this stuff, and inherited a mess because once the BBC had committed to doing some of these shows in color, it wasn't just Doctor Who, it was all kinds of shows that they were all going to do in color. The corporate kind of went to the cameramen, who were all in a union, and said, so there's a lot to learn about these color cameras, but we're not going to pay you the time it's going to take to learn it. You'll have to do that in your own time. And these guys, as a group, said, and left. And with the season yet to be shot, all of these shows that were, getting ready to launch their new seasons in color, all the commercials have been running and everything. So this producer on Doctor Who, he said, he kind of looked around and said, well, the only people who are still producing, visual content for the network right now are the news people who shoot things on 16 millimeter film. And so they contracted with the BBC film unit to shoot this episode and only Spearhead from Space on 16 millimeter film, which had the advantage of being upscalable years later. But meanwhile, it has that dingy look of everything from the 70s shot on 16 millimeter film.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, everything just looks kind of grungy.
Yes.
And it's not their fault. They just, it's 16 millimeter film. And I was laughing actually when we get our first look at Liz Shaw, not laughing at her, but because the camera is really compact, if there's no dialogue, you can sit in the passenger seat of a car and shoot somebody in the back seat. So a lot of people were really excited about stuff like that because you couldn't do that with the great big, video cameras in the studio, right? So really for the first time, we're going to get a shot of somebody just riding in the backseat of a car going, but then they had this perky music over it. And I thought this looks exactly like documentaries of the time that you expect a voiceover to say, this is lovely Liz Shaw. She's on her way to become a scientific advisor for UNIT. That's right. The United Nations Intelligence Task Force. Miss Shaw is just as brilliant as she is comely. That's why,
Keep going. That was entertaining.
And here they are now.
So was 16 millimeter like mostly just used for documentaries at that time? Because initially I will say that I thought the difference felt good to me at first, but it didn't seem to persist throughout the 4 episodes, if that makes any sense. 'Cause I like you, that shot of her in the car, I feel like, oh, this might feel like something from that time that, or at least how I envisioned it would feel,
That's right. Oh, yeah. If you've seen any of the documentaries made here or there at that time, I mean, 16 millimeter was sort of it was the favored film camera of war correspondents, because the cameras are relatively compact for a movie camera. And so you can put it in your knapsack and, get out on the battlefield and shoot stuff like that. And then after the war, they were adapted for that kind of documentary, anywhere where you may need to get into the backseat of a car with somebody and shoot, which you just couldn't do with video cameras of the day.
Yeah.
And it's why the show had often shot on film when they were outdoors. There's a Monty Python's Flying Circus sketch where they play with the fact that inside the studio they're always on video and outside they're always on film. So there's some guys inside and they open the door and look outside and they say, "My God, we're on film." And they close the door and come back inside. I think we're surrounded. How do we get out? This show ends up being shot on a narrow gauge, grainy film that shot by newsmen who were really, great at going out in the field and capturing stuff, but recording studio quality sound, dealing with the lighting challenges of being inside a real hospital, and making it look like something presentable for TV and not a film about what it's like to be inside this hospital.
Yeah.
It's just not what they were. It's not what they were trained or what they were equipped to do. That first little interview across the brigadier's desk where he's talking to Liz for what seems like an hour, I really would like to go back in time and go there and find out where the microphone is, because it's not over either of them, and I don't know why it's shot that way. But the audio is just laughable. It's just we wouldn't let this podcast go out if it sounded like that. But it's in an episode of Doctor Who,
Well, just remember, just for remembering, one of us did try to change his voice on the very first episode. That's all I'm saying.
There you go.
This actually brought up an interesting thing that I meant to ask when we were doing one of the previous black and white videos, and I thought it would be a good time to ask this question now. But before I ask my question, I'll comment on something Clarence said. I felt also that it seemed to clean up a little bit, like the graininess seemed to be not as noticeable toward the end of the story. And I'm hearing you guys talk and I'm wondering, is that because A, we got used to it as just from watching it and you just became accustomed to it? B, those cameramen did start to get used to recording those type of scenes as they shot those scenes. Let's just assume they were in sequence. Or C, maybe a combination of both.
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. And we were spending a lot more time indoors where if it was a set that was lit for video, that wouldn't be bad for film.
True.
It wouldn't be ideal, but, so we're inside these laboratories and so on, and the basic unit and things like that. And finally the last Auton laboratory where the guy has the TV screen with the giant space anus on it, that's.
So before we get to the back end of this story, I literally want to ask about the techniques for black and white. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but weren't there certain colors that you could and could not use to be transferred into film or tape or whatever it was, but be presented in black and white?
Yeah, there are some colors that just don't render well in a grayscale film. In the silent movie era, some people used to wear goggles that would almost give the person looking through the glasses a black and white view, so they could see what it was going to look like on film. even into the 60s, it was not unusual for TV directors and cameramen and scenic designers to have a piece of gel that they could hold up, just a plastic sheet that they could hold up in front of their eyes and look through it at the set to see what it was going to look like on a black and white TV.
Okay.
And sometimes you'd get a nasty shock. You go, wow, those two things look exactly alike. They're supposed to be contrasting. Oh, okay, let's paint that a different color. But yeah, the story that everybody knows is that's why Boris Karloff's Frankenstein monster is painted green, because if you painted him deathly pale, you couldn't see the details in his face and in the rest of the makeup at all. And the idea was he's supposed to look like a corpse. So the way ironically, they found that to get that corpse-like look was to paint him green. But then people started seeing color photos from the set, and then so ever since then we've had the idea that the Frankenstein monster is green. And
interesting.
But that's why. Yeah.
And now that you said that, if you go back and look at the Adventure in Space and Time movie, there's parts of the TARDIS that had the green tint to it.
That's right. Yep. And when we're seeing it in color, and some of it was this kind of almost pastel green.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, that's cool. I'm glad I asked that.
Yeah, I do. I think it's very interesting. One of the films that I used to show in my intro cinema classes, I'm blanking on the name of it anyway, but it's a film that is a sort of a fictionalized, very fictionalized telling of making the 1920s film Nosferatu. So we see these people on the set making this, and the German filmmakers, they're always wearing these goggles, like they're expecting sparks to come out of their camera or something. And I always ask my students, can you think of any reason why they'd all have these goggles on? And some of them figure it out, and they go, is it so they can see what the set looks and people look like in black and white? Aha. Yeah.
So, Clarence, I want to ask you, I want to transition real quick to the Doctor himself. So you had the luxury of seeing the end of the War Games, seeing once again the second Doctor, and you immediately go into the third Doctor. Question, what was your first impression of the third Doctor?
Oh, boy. It doesn't feel like the Doctor. I don't know. It's just something about it being devoid of the things that kind of, his accessories, kind of things that make up the Doctor. I feel like that makes him feel a bit different in this story, especially, when you get into the latter half of the story. The first part of the story, it felt a lot like David Tennant's introduction, actually.
Yep.
And again, I have to say that I loved how they explored, this guy that they found, and with him being in the hospital, they explored him as an alien, and we got the we got the X-rays of his chest, and we got the blood sample taken. So all of that stuff I liked seeing, again, as in comparison to what we saw with David Tennant. Now, as far as just his actual portrayal of the Doctor, it just didn't stick with me, and I'm not sure why. Because it wasn't like he was doing anything out of the ordinary, but something just wasn't compelling about the performance or the lines he was given for the episodes.
So I have a theory, but before I give my theory, I want to hear what Lee says, because I really have a theory. I'm glad you said what you did, because I have a theory. Lee, what do you say?
Well, I'm thinking about our watching time in the Ronnie and trying to figure out the seventh Doctor, based on that too. And he's so unlike what he will ultimately become. It's really hard to tell. And that struck me this time too, is that we don't really get the third Doctor in this, maybe until the very, very, very end. But I have often wondered, and maybe somebody like Dave Cooper can tell us, but John Pertwee was already very well known. By this audience, maybe more so than William Hartnell or Patrick Troughton, because he was the star of a long-running radio comedy series called The Navy Lark. And in which he played a character named Pertwee. In fact, all of the major characters had the same names as the actors who played them. But funny show. And he was a stage comedian, and he had been played comic roles in movies. People knew him. They knew him as a comedian. And I wonder if that's why he does it in this episode, and he'll do it in many serials later when something's, strangling him or somebody's grabbed him from behind. He'll bug his eyes out, and, sometimes he'll cross his eyes and so on. And I never liked that, but maybe he thought it was worth it because it got a laugh. But I always thought, I don't know. But anyway, but yeah, I just have to wonder what people were thinking. Were they already on his side because they liked him,
Yeah.
So one of the first things we get is him hiding from the hospital brass, and he gets in the shower, and he's not just getting a shower, but he's got a shower cap on. Why? But and he's singing while he's in the shower. And I think probably a lot of people who knew John Pertwee already, they would have thought that was hilarious. I don't know.
So here's my theory, and it's going to tie into what Clarence said about the doctor feeling a little bit off because, and I'm going to say again, this is another reason I'm so glad we're going back and seeing and reviewing some of these older episodes, because it puts you in a different mindset. And that mindset gives me, I don't think, especially in those first appearances, first 3 episodes, maybe a little even into the 4th one to some degree, this didn't feel like Doctor Number 3 to me. This felt like John Pertwee playing a Patrick Troughton's second Doctor, because there was a little bit of vocal mannerisms of some of the things that he said that said to me, you're trying to do a little bit of Patrick Troughton, because I have never been able to try to do any of any of Pertwee's lines, because I never could kind of mimic his vocal tics. Whereas I was listening to him say some of his lines and I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. And then I would back up. I was like, those kind of sound like Patrick Troughton just with you saying them. So I'm wondering if he was trying to project that as part of I'm still the Doctor.
Interesting. And knowing that he's in transition, he's
correct, because I noticed it less and less as the story went on. This was more of him first waking up, him first meeting the Brigadier, him, that first, especially, the first and second episodes. But then by the end, it's more of what I'm used to. But go back and listen to some of those early scenes and see if you notice the same thing, because it just seemed like I could shut my eyes and I could imagine Patrick Troughton there instead of him.
That's a very interesting perspective. Those first, I want to say it's in the second episode, I could be wrong, has a line that I had never heard until somebody pointed it out to me. But one of the orderlies at the hospital says his face has settled down. And was it Nicole telling us this? I want to say that somebody had recently turned me onto this, was that it may be that the intent of the script, that this was an ambition that they had when they were writing this, was that what we were going to see first was a face that was somewhat Patrick Troughton somehow, and that we were going to finally get a morph into John Pertwee in the hospital.
Oh, that would have been cool.
And then, then there's the strike and everything else. And I think it just went by the wayside. And then that line of dialogue is still in the script. His face has settled down.
It kind of makes sense. Yeah, because he stumbles out of the TARDIS.
Right. Still wearing the check pants and the swallowback coat. Yeah.
So what did you guys, speaking of the TARDIS, what did you guys think of how the TARDIS looked in this episode?
It's going to be pretty shabby throughout the third and fourth Doctor's time. I always wondered why it looked like it's been painted 75 million times, and maybe because it had. I don't know. How did that strike you, Clarence?
Didn't really jump out at me one way or the other. It's a TARDIS.
It's still the TARDIS. I know that one of the things we always have to remember watching these is that that TV screens at this time still had, even the new color ones, they still had scan lines, and there weren't a lot of scan lines. So the image that we're seeing now, even while I'm complaining about how grungy some of it looked, it would have been, we're seeing so much more information than people really would have seen on their TV sets.
And I'll just add that, this being, not to be totally missing the question, this would be the first time, viewers see the TARDIS in color on the show itself. Now, I don't know if there may have been other places, displays it somewhere that they can go see that it was in a certain color.
Right.
How often was Blue Box mentioned prior to this? Was it pretty well known that it was a blue telephone box, or were just all the police boxes of that time were blue?
Yeah, the ones still in service in 1963, they were blue. So
okay,
people would have seen them. They would have known it was blue. But yeah, I had a friend from Scotland who told me that in Scotland they were red. I just a bit of trivia there. Anyway,
so let's talk about Liz for a moment. So comparing her with Jamie and Zoe, and seeing her come in as this self-assured, scientist in her own right. Initial thoughts, did she make an impression, or was she given the opportunity to make an impression? And Clarence, why don't you go first? Did you connect with her at all in this story?
Yeah, I didn't at all. I mean, to me, she didn't even feel like a companion in this story. Of course, once we get to what becomes the doctor's office at UNIT, you see it start to meld a little bit thin, but I never really felt that she seemed like a true companion. And maybe that's something people watching this series, being stranded on Earth, maybe that's something that everybody watching it has to come to grips with or get used to, the fact that they're just there. It just feels a little bit different.
What about you, Lee?
I have always disliked Liz Shaw, and I really wanted to give her a chance this time, largely because our friend Nicole is a big fan. And I thought, well, that doesn't come from nowhere. And I realized I'm not sure what I've been judging her so harshly for. When we meet her, she's a skeptic because she's a scientist. She wants evidence. And the Brigadier is telling her what sounds like a fairy tale. And so she doesn't believe it until she experiences it and can, and then she's on board. I don't know why I thought there was something about her manner or something that I just didn't like. But no, I was I was really with her this time. And I love that the script gives her the chance to save the doctor in the end. And, through her own smarts. I mean, she has to take that thing apart and put it back together again so that it works. And she does it under stress. And he doesn't die of having his eyes popped out. So,
this has never been a character that I've connected with, but there's an equal amount of this has never been a character that I've disconnected with. I've just never had an affinity for her character. And I don't know if it's what you guys just said, or if it was the fact of there was not a real place for her, because if you see how she is such an independent, forceful character, and no disrespect to the character that comes next in any way, because number one, the actor who portrays it is a marvelous, marvelous, kind and generous person. But you go from her to Joe Grant, who goes back in the opposite direction, completely like doing a 180 and putting you totally opposite of what she is.
That's right. She's about as unlike Liz Shaw as she can possibly be.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I am going to be brutally honest in saying there were not a lot of story points, because we've already said that there were things in it that we found as being a little bit boring. But I did want to mention briefly the Autons and the Nestine consciousness, because they play important roles later on in the series, specifically in 2005 in Rose, when we see a new version of the Nestine consciousness.
Right.
So initial thoughts of the Autons, let's take them first. What did you guys think of this plastic creature that basically mannequins coming to life? What did you guys think of that concept?
I'm waiting for Clarence.
Me too.
Yeah, well, no, I thought it was interesting. I do. So, is this the first time we see the Autons?
Yes.
This is and our introduction to the idea of the great intelligence and the nesting consciousness and everything.
Okay, well, it's going to make my point that much better.
Yeah.
I think in black and white, it would have been harder to pull them off. Not necessarily when they're because you have like a few versions, I feel, in these episodes. You have ones that look more like, the mannequins. You have some that look more like real people. I think the ones that look more like real people may be a little bit harder to distinguish in black and white, if I'm analyzing that correctly. So as far as it goes, I thought they were interesting. And again, I like how they came down from space, and I thought all of that was cool and interesting. But for some reason, although interesting, it just didn't grab me at all, and it just felt boring. We kept going back to the office, and you have this, I forget the office worker's name,
Exactly.
it just felt boring. That's kind of where I end with that.
All right. Lee, what say you?
Yeah, I'm the same way. So that by the time, all this action happens with the Autons, you got to be saying, finally, get some people on the run and break through the shop windows. And of course, the mannequins breaking through the shop windows has now become almost like a meme of Doctor Who. You've got to have the Autons break through a window at one point, and the store mannequins and that kind of thing. I wish that there had been some kind of a bigger threat for the Third Doctor's first adventure, or I don't know. It's just it's hard to take the Auton attacks seriously. It bugs me when the human who they've co-opted says the Autons are indestructible. I think no, they're not. If they're plastic. Oh, come on. So it's just sort of story logic, things like that. And I don't know.
So I don't know if this is a good thing for the story, but I think it's going to fall in it's a bad thing for the story category. And what that is what I like most about these is not from the story. It's the fact that the Autons, the store dummies, appeared in rows. Mm-hmm. We have the Autons with the handgun, as I call it.
Mm-hmm.
We see that.
Cool. It's a handgun.
Yeah, we see the handgun, and we will see the handgun. No spoilers here, but we will see the handgun later in the 11th Doctor's era. So everything I like about them, honestly, other than, yes, they were in Classic, are tied to New Who.
Well, when we introduce the Master, we'll also get the Autons and all of that stuff again, too. So, yeah.
Indeed. And you know what? Maybe their story was gelled a little bit better that time. And I don't know what it was with this one, because we reviewed that one that introduced the Master, and we liked that episode.
Yeah.
All three of us did. So. All right. So I want to ask, well, since we've gotten to the rear end of the conversation, I will say, what did you guys think of the nesting consciousness? And I keep saying that. I don't mean to interrupt, but I keep saying that because it's Lee Shackelford's fault for bringing that to our attention.
Yes. It's funny that this time it never struck me before that the image of the nesting consciousness that we're presented with really looked to me like the guy. What he really has is a commercial on his TV advertising some kind of a treatment for hemorrhoids. And they're depicting graphically what Preparation H can do for you. But I think, I don't know if we're supposed to be terrified by this. It would be uncomfortable, but anyway. But yeah, so that unfortunate video effect is one thing, but the other thing is that it's really hard for us looking back to Spearhead from Space. We've had such interesting depictions of the nesting consciousness since then. My favorite is in Rose, and so once you've got that in your mind, anything else is going to be disappointment. The tentacles that I guess were borrowed from stage version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, perhaps, or something. I don't know what they are, but it's a very unconvincing effect, and John Pertwee's grimacing doesn't help it any. So it's just, I don't know what that's supposed to have to do with the consciousness.
Well, see,
are those plastic tentacles? We're told that it doesn't have a corporeal form.
Thank you.
Then they're tentacles, and I don't.
Yeah, I wrote that down. It was like, you just said that it is it's not corporeal.
It doesn't have a body.
and then the next thing we know, here comes the tentacles.
Right. Yes. Well, it doesn't have a body, just tentacles. I don't.
Oh, wow, this episode. So,
yeah.
I guess
we when we're talking about cast and characters here, we've really skipped past the brig, and I'd like to back up just a second to talk about Nicholas Courtney here. He's the glue, really, if you think about it from the viewer's viewpoint. Everything is different about this, except this character that we've seen a couple of times before in Adventures with the Second Doctor. So he's really the only one who knows that we have any chance of recognizing or hanging on to. And it struck me this time, for the first time ever, that the formula for this show has always been that the Doctor is going to be older and kind of odd looking, and we need to have a handsome young man. And so it could be Ian, or it could be Jamie, or any of those guys, and it could be a pretty girl. So the lineup that they're building here is that the pretty girl is going to be Liz, and the Doctor is going to be John Pertwee. Hoo-hoo! And so the handsome young man is Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart.
True.
And I've just never thought of him as being the eye candy guy before. So I'm trying to kind of put on a different mindset while watching this, and it really hit me for the first time. He really was a strikingly handsome man in these days. I could see why that was the thinking. I thought, no, this is a good looking fella. And I guess the part of why that's never struck me before is that he is such he's the Brigadier. He's just got this ramrod in his back, and that's his character, But it's and the Doctor can really, really get at odds with him sometimes, but their relationship is largely affectionate. So it is interesting. It's an interesting trio, and I guess until this time, I'd never really thought about it that way. But this is the same formula the show has always used. It's just that now the handsome young man character is nominally in charge. Nominally.
and like, just to comment on to piggyback off of what you just said, it felt like the first 2/3 to half of this arc felt like the unit / Brigadier show. I guess that's why it feels so weird to me. It didn't really feel like a Doctor series or episodes. It just felt like it was mostly unit, mostly the Brigadier.
That's right. And they're getting us ready for the fact that it's going to be like that for years and years now. But it's always the struggle for the Brigadier to keep it the unit show, but it never, from here on, it never works out that way. The Doctor's going to do whatever he wants to do, but he can't leave.
And did either of you notice that while we saw the TARDIS, we never went inside? This was one time we did not see that control room.
That struck me only because I had forgotten that he tells Liz what the inside is like, and she says, "Oh, come on." And I thought, well, this is easily fixed. But he doesn't take her in there.
Yeah.
I thought, look, let's just step over here and I'll show you. And I thought, well, that's odd. What is? I wouldn't be able to resist that if I were him.
Yeah, also interesting, the Brigadier has the key but can't get in.
Yeah.
What did he say? It was some type of filter on getting in the door or using the key?
Kind of like a bio lock or something.
Yeah, I couldn't remember if he actually explained that or not. But yeah.
Is that a thing? That's my first time hearing that.
That has been mentioned elsewhere.
Well, remember there was one time in the Rings of Acta whatever in series 7 that the TARDIS wouldn't, even though Clara had a key, the TARDIS wouldn't let Clara in.
Yeah. I forgot about that one. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of, but yeah.
Could it be that the reason why we don't go in the TARDIS is for the same reason that we were talking a little bit earlier? It was all painted green and they didn't want to break that perception filter that the audience is seeing for it being white?
I think that's probably close to it. I think the truth is that was in the studio that is all controlled by video. And
well said.
Yeah, I think that's, because the video cameras would have been still in there on the floor and you would have to be a union operator to touch them.
Got you. That makes sense.
So, yeah, I had never thought about that until you said it. Yeah, I bet that's why they don't go inside. Huh. Oh, well.
Well, as a compliment to the Brigadier, honestly, he was one of the reasons, or one of the main reasons I wanted to review this, other than it being a post-regeneration story. I just like the opportunity to review a Brigadier story. I just wish that I would have remembered that this did not have the strengths that I remembered it having. So, any other thoughts, notes, or anything that you guys had that we've not brought up that you wanted to go over?
Nothing comes to mind.
Mr. Brown?
If I remember his closing, didn't he say Smith, John Smith, in a very James Bondish way?
It's the last words of the episode, yeah.
I was like, no, this isn't Doctor Who.
Yeah. But that really this was sort of John Pertwee's influence on this, is that when they talked to him about playing the Doctor, he said, and remember what year this is, he said, okay, but I wanted to be James Bond. That's who I want to be. So,
Venusian judo.
Exactly. We're going to have some hand-to-hand combat, and I'm going to be, man about town and all this stuff. But for tea time.
And I'm going to have Jazzy Car.
Yes, I'm going to have a Jazzy Car that doesn't do tricks or anything.
No.
But still, no.
And I'm going to name it after a cow.
Right.
Oh. All right. Any other items? All right. So my final comment was that I wrote down after watching the entire series or story was this felt like a pilot episode for me. And what I mean by that is so often when you watch the pilot episode and then you watch the follow-up episodes and you see subtle changes to maybe how a character dresses or subtle changes to the cast, meaning there were some people in the first episode pilot that aren't back or have been recast or whatever for the series going forward. Because other than Liz and the Brig, people like Sergeant Benton and Mike Yates, we don't see head nor hair of them in this story. And this general that they introduce, I don't think we see again in later stories. I may be wrong, but I don't think we do. So this felt very pilot episode to me.
Yeah.
All right.
That's right, especially once you point out that we have yet to introduce some of the characters who will become, the regulars.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, gentlemen, favorite scene. Did you have a favorite scene?
You know what cracked me up this time in a way that I don't think I'd ever thought about before is the poacher who's got one of the nesting spheres in his shed, and this whole argument with his wife, and he finally opens the box and he's getting ready to reach back into the shed, and for no reason at all, his wife comes back out like out of a bird out of a cuckoo clock. Like, what are you doing out there? Get in the house, woman.
Not bringing that in the house.
Exactly. Not bringing this in my house. It just cracked me up that this was a picture of their whole relationship. She's grudgingly gone to the house, but she's going to come right back because she knows what he's doing. She knows he's doing something he's not supposed to. Yeah. It's a funny little moment.
I will say I did think that they were unnecessary as a whole. I think that was some of the padding that I felt. But I will add that I found their house to look interesting. The concept of you have to kind of duck in to get in the door.
Yep. And I as a tall guy in Britain, I can vouch for the fact that they don't make the doors tall enough for me. I mean, some of these houses are hundreds of years old. I mean, that one was a Tudor-style house with a thatched roof. People were smaller back then. And, I've had to stoop and duck into a lot of places there, but I thought
about both of you when they were walking through, and I was like, I don't think that would be a location that the three of us want to visit.
There are certainly places that would have Clarence's forehead permanently embedded into them. Wasn't watching where it's going.
All right. So, Clarence, did you have a scene or anything that stood out to you?
I think maybe my favorite one of this episode was when the doctor was in there looking at the x-rays. He was like, who's been playing around with the x-rays? I see two hearts, something to that effect.
That's
and
right.
he goes to actually chastise the x-rayers or the x-ray technicians about the two hearts, thinking they're playing around. Then he gets a call and gets chastised about the blood. So I love that little, thing right there where they were kind of trying to figure out what the heck was going on.
Cool. So I really didn't have a favorite scene. If I had to create one in my head, it would be the very first, even though it did look a little awkward, when we see the doctor fall out of the TARDIS for the sole purpose of the fact that this is the first colorized episode. I know that's kind of a cop-out, but I'm going with it. That's my favorite scene because it's the first colorized episode, and it wasn't one that was wiped, So there you go. All right, favorite quote. Did either of you have a favorite Spearhead from Space quote?
I don't know a favorite, but there were a couple of times where I just sort of sat up in my chair because I feel like I know a lot about space and space travel. Lethbridge Stewart, when he's kind of lecturing Liz at the beginning, he says, in the last decade, we've been sending probes deeper and deeper into space. We've drawn attention to ourselves, Miss Shaw. We haven't really, by this point, been that far out into space. I wanted to say, well, if they were already in Earth orbit, then somebody may have noticed us, yes. But,
Hey, man, it was deep back then, man. Come on.
It was, it's all relative. But yeah, but things like Voyager are still a few years away.
Yeah.
and then later on, she says, well, not all meteorites reach the Earth. And I thought, no, by definition, a meteorite is a meteor that reaches the Earth. That's what a meteorite is. So I wish the doctor was here to hear her say that. Not all meteorites reach. What? Anyway.
All right. Clarence Brown, what say ye?
I don't think I have one other than John Smith, that I kind of cop-out answer that I mentioned before.
Okay. I gave a cop-out answer. If I can do it, you can do it too.
There you go.
All right. So I actually did have a quote that I found, and it's not from the doctor. It actually is from the Brigadier, and it's similar to what Lee was saying, but the Brigadier says, what you don't understand is that there is a remote possibility that outside your cozy little world, other things could exist. And I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah. It's really mansplainy, but, fortunately he's not wrong.
But we are making progress. They did not ask Liz to go wait somewhere while they went and did whatever. She got to come and do whatever with them.
You really gotta hand that. And you remind me of another thing too, is that it would be tempting for the Brigadier to be dismissive of her because she's a woman, and he totally does not do that. And then the general, who's kind of from a general, from a different time, right? He comes in, and the first thing he does is say, "Oh, it's good to have a lovely face around the place," And the Brigadier calls him on it. He says, "She's much more than a pretty face, sir."
And just as a side note, it goes.
She's got a great body too.
True. Well, just as a side note, it is. I think they did very good casting. X number of years, however, 40-something years later, when they cast Kate Stewart, because she just so much, going back and watching this and having recently watched an episode that she was on, she really does a good job of doing some of the Brigadier's I'm all about business type mannerisms. And, kudos to her for doing a good job as the Brigadier's daughter.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, final rating, and we'll wrap this thing up. Final rating. Clarence, since you just enjoyed this so much, I'm going to start with you. Final rating. What say you?
Man, this one is going to be hard for me. I will give it 2 shoes under the pillow out of 5. That's all I got. I did not enjoy this episode at all. I mean, honestly, I had to struggle to get through it. Just didn't hold my attention. It was interesting for being, the first episode. And a few, good tidbits in there. But for the most part, I just did not enjoy this.
All right. Nothing wrong with that. Lee Shackelford, what say ye?
I'm going to be generous and give it 2.5 frilly shirts.
Okay.
So,
any particular reason?
No.
Okay. Perfectly fine. So I'm going to meet you guys in the middle and give it 2.25 red lined jackets that also were similarly worn by the 12th Doctor in his first season. So because of that, I'll give it 2.25, but for no other reason, I'm just going to give it 2.25. So, gentlemen, one final question. And Lee, I'll start with you. I've been directing to Clarence several times, and I will direct this one to you. Where else might you be found on the internet?
I've been working on my personal website, and so I'm going to point people there because it points you in all the other directions as well. And that is shackelfordfreelance.com.
Awesome. All right. Clarence Brown, where else might you be found on the internet?
I'm just going to give a parting gift, and that's going to be the Orphan Black cast is going to reunite for a 2-episode virtual reading, which will take place on the official Orphan Black Facebook page on May 17th at 12 p.m. Pacific time. So if you're an Orphan Black fan, live table read. Yeah.
Okay. So let me just ask you. So are all the sisters going to be reading?
I know they said 3 of them. No, 4 of them would be there. But, I mean, it's all Tatiana, so she's awesome.
Yeah, but I was thinking that would be it would be so cool to see her visually transition. But if they would have not done it live and had it recorded, that would have been even more so cool. But anyway.
Yeah.
That is very cool. I will throw out, if anyone, since you said parting gifts, I will throw out, because I've become obsessed, literally, can't stop watching this show. If you like crime dramas and you like British crime dramas, Vera, Vera, look it up. It's on Amazon. It's on Acorn TV. It's on BritBox. Look it up. Like I said, I'm totally obsessed with watching this show. So Vera. And I will say thank you again, gentlemen. Unfortunately, we can't like them all, but we can agree that some are better than others. So with that, thank you again. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will be back next time. You've been listening to the Discussing Network. Find out more at discussingnetwork.com.